we're 50% of the way through the project and we use 75% of our contingency. That's, we're the ones that are down in the weeds, so we've got to step up and make the comment and force the conversation. Everyone really does. It's everybody's responsibility. Ultimately, it really does come back to who's the ultimate manager on the project. But part of being a manager is figuring out how to delegate those detailed responsibilities and trust your people to be doing the right thing.
So let's say you have that perfect schedule. How do you then take that and convince people that there needs to be additional time onto that isn't fluff or buffer or, people want to go hit that date? What's your kind of next step to get people convinced that it needs contingency?
We may use analysis of individual activities to figure out what the net contingency should be. But the fact of the matter is when we're planning, we don't necessarily know exactly what activities are going to be the ones that hit us and kill us. We know which we can do it. We can do a Monte Carlo. We can do, just informal analysis and say, hey, we've been burned by this delivery or we've been burned by this sub before.
So a project is a unique endeavor. A unique endeavor by definition is not a commodity. But there are commodity type projects out there and commodity type clients. What you're essentially saying here is there are people we won't play with. Because if you're taking a collaborative shared contingency-based approach, for example, you're going to have to refuse to deal with a client that just wants to beat you down and doesn't want to share.
Hi, folks. A quick one before we dive into this week's episode. Our book, The Critical Path Career, How to Advance in Construction Planning and Scheduling, is out now, and you can order it on Amazon. We'll include a link below. This is a great way to show support for the Beyond Deadlines podcast, and Greg and I have worked extremely hard taking everything we know in our 30 years of experience, plus everything we've picked up from shooting this podcast, and we've tried to pack it into an information-dense book that you can use right away. In the book, we have specific strategies on how to get a raise, how to get a promotion, and find a new job. We include 26 of the best interview questions that we have come across, in addition to 34 specific impact ideas that you can go use on your projects today. We want to thank everyone who's shown us support so far and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah. I'm a planning and scheduling manager.
And my name is Greg Lawton. I'm the CEO of an AI schedule management company called Notes.
And my name is Noah Aronson. I'm the senior schedule manager at Holder Construction. I run the scheduling department here.
Today, we are going to talk about that dirty little word called contingency. Noah's on the hot seat today. Noah, you've been assigned at a large GC to set up a program to build contingency into projects. How do you go about doing it?
Yeah, that's a big, broad, open one. Basically, the first thing we do is we start out by figuring out, what is the right optimal schedule for the project, trying to figure out how we're going to build it, what we need in a perfect world to get there, and then try and identify where our risks are and make sure that we're planning for the fact that the unthinkable happens. Career, we've had several times where we've sat down and we've come up with the optimal schedule and then did nothing else and fought to the end. We've also had times where we've had project managers and superintendents who have sat down and said, this 9-month project, we really need 14 months, so we're going to call it a 14-month schedule and then sandbag and get there. But, our goal is to sit down and figure out what the real ask is in a perfect world and then throw some contingency on there to make sure that we've got it covered and we're ensuring success for everybody involved in the project.
Yeah, that's a great tee off to it. Let's kind of dive into that scenario you talked about where you go build the schedule and then it ends up being the perfect schedule. I think one thing that comes to mind with me is some people don't realize that you just done that because you've sat in the workshop for 3 or 4 days. You've gone through all the activities. You've done the forward passes, back passes. People are kind of like, well, this is what it is. I said 4 days. It's going to be 4 days. So let's say you have that perfect schedule. How do you then take that and convince people that there needs to be additional time onto that isn't fluff or buffer or, people want to go hit that date? What's your kind of next step to get people convinced that it needs contingency?
Well, I mean, the first thing we do is we point out to them that they're doing it already in their cost model. So why is schedule any different? I mean, cost and schedule are very closely linked. The fact of the matter is this is not a perfect world. I forget the exact quote, but that famous quote about no battle plan survives the first step into battle. So the fact of the matter is stuff is going to happen. Murphy has a very strong franchise, so we need to plan for that. We accept that in the cost model where we carry design contingency, contractor contingency, owner contingency. So why not when we're talking about the schedule as well? Because when we create that schedule, we're sitting down and saying nothing's going to go wrong. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how good you are, something's going to go wrong. I've been in commercial construction for over 25 years and in another industry for 10 before that, and nothing's ever gone perfect that I've seen, whether it was me doing it or somebody else. So it's just having that conversation with people, and then also helping people understand that we're going to try and be transparent as compared to there's a lot of contractors and a lot of paths I've crossed in my own career where they sit down and say, hey, you know what, we're going to hide our contingency and put it in there. So we're going to sandbag, or we're going to find a way to keep two schedules, or whatever nefarious way of doing it. And our attitude is, you know what, we want to be in a collaborative process, and we want everyone bought into the project together, because if one of us succeeds, we all succeed. And if one of us fails, we all fail.
So let's just flip that around for a second. Let's say that we're talking about two different scenarios, because the task here is to develop a contingency capability in an organization. Let's split it into a bidding capability and then a delivery capability. What happens if the bid manager comes back and goes, no, we won't win if we add time. Please don't do that. How do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, a couple things. First of all, typically when we're in a bid moment, well, first of all, Holder is very much, most of our projects are negotiated projects, CGMPs, where we go in with the NGCs and get the project to the right project. Very fortunate to work for a company that has that ability. But where we do have bid projects, and where in my past we've done bid projects, we would typically go in with a level 1, level 2 schedule that we know is relatively safe, but still as aggressive. We want to be aggressive, but we want to be aggressive in a way we know we can achieve. And then as the project kicks off, we will go and build that detail and try and build it as aggressively as possible to get back from what we originally proposed on the high level, and then put the contingency back in to still fill within those bookends.
Got it. Okay. So now we're moving into the delivery phase. Now you'll have to forgive me for a second. I'm a bit of a physicist and mathematician. Micah's the individual who understands people. You're all this abstract capability to me. Would you put contingency on the individual activities themselves, or would you group them into buckets, or would you group them into milestones? Like, what is the general strategy for how you actually deploy contingency within a schedule?
So my ideal as well, is that we are not putting them on individual activities. We're putting them on the project itself. We may use analysis of individual activities to figure out what the net contingency should be. But the fact of the matter is when we're planning, we don't necessarily know exactly what activities are going to be the ones that hit us and kill us. We know which we can do it. We can do a Monte Carlo. We can do, just informal analysis and say, hey, we've been burned by this delivery, or we've been burned by this sub before, so we need to allow for it. But the bottom line is at the end of the day, we like to put buckets for where the appropriate contingency lies, whether that's project bucket, weather bucket, or a contractor bucket. We do like to divide those up if we can and say we feel that the project itself needs maybe 6 days a year, whatever it is based on what our analysis says. And, we want to carry as the contractor, because we know we've had historical problems that we want to make sure we're prepared for X amount. And then weather-wise, we'll look at, the weather stuff and say we're going to carry Y amount for weather, and then, manage them appropriately compared to what bucket they are.
I'll ask one more and then Micah can jump in. So you said something then about being burnt in the past or lessons that you've learnt before. How much do you actually join that circle? And what I mean by that is you'll say, this is how long things can take. This is the contingency we plan. And then at the end of the project, you do the shutdown. What actually happened and how long did things actually take, and what are the actual productivity rates? And then that feeds into, I guess, the company's database of productivity and the company's database of contingency. How important it is to join that loop?
I think the easy answer is we don't close that loop enough. We don't have the debriefs as much as I would really like us to, but we do make it a point to talk about what happened on the project when we get to the end and try and memorialize that information. We're working very much to collect data and to keep ourselves, to have that institutional knowledge documented someplace officially and not just in the minds and memories of the people around us. But yes, I mean, again, my answer to that question is not enough, but that is what we try and do is we try and sit down at the end of the project and say, okay, we had this, the dust is settled. What's going on? What bit us? We're getting ready to do another project for owner X. What were the differences there? What's the same in the design that we're going to run into the same problems? What's different? Who are people we've worked with before that we've had problems with or that have had delivery issues? What's going on in the news? Whatever it is that hit us, so we can use that to our advantage going down the road.
So let's say that you did it on one project. Let's say this was like your first project in this hypothetical scenario, and you got to sell like the project director and the project manager, and they all bought off on it. But now you want to take this company-wide, policy-wide, like that what sort of methods and tactics are you taking to then move this across, the breadth of what a company would deliver? Because I feel like that is where contingency like processes always go to die. You like maybe an owner brought it in on one, or you had a flexible project manager or whatever, and then you go to do another project and they're like, nope, we signed up for 14 months. It's got to be 14 months. And you're just sitting there going, no, this is an 18-month project. So how do you start to shift it to like an organizational contingency process?
The first thing is to make sure that everybody on our side of the fence is bought into what the ideal is and also what the alternatives are. Very current issue for us. We're working on that right now. It's very much my goal for the next year is to make sure that we have institutionalized it, and it's not just the 90% of the projects that are doing it at way X, but start the conversation early is what needs to happen. As a company, when we're negotiating projects, when we're having conversations, is having that conversation about, the fact of the matter is we're going to go in there, we're going to tell you what we think it's going to take to build it. Then we're going to go in there, we're going to sharpen our pencil and get it as tight as we can and hold our contingency to make sure that we all succeed, and having that conversation up front so that we enter into the project that way. There are definitely owners and contractual situations that make it difficult sometimes. There are definitely situations where the ideal doesn't work, and you got to go into that on day one knowing what it is that everybody's agreed to and going that way and approach your project accordingly. Bottom line, though, is making sure that whatever we do, we're going into a project with a single source of truth and not going in and being disingenuous about what we're doing. And, if we find an owner who's not willing to accept the concept of contingency, still not having two different schedules, that's unacceptable. And we see it happen in the industry way too much. Actually, I call it the 3 schedule problem because we typically will have 2 different schedules one for the owner, one for the contractor. We being the industry will have 2 different schedules, one for the owner, one for the contractor, and then we'll have a whole plan and detailed schedule for the day-to-day. And when you start doing that, you're really lucky if any of those have anything to do with anything else. And so
I was going to say the three schedule dance. I'm like 2 you're selling yourself, and then when you get into the pull plan, you realize each sub has a different pull plan maybe, and so now you're in like I got a 12 schedule dance going on. Let's kind of dive in. Let's ignore owners for a second, and let's just dive more into kind of that intercompany push. Walk me through then how you're thinking about that 2025 approach. Are you going around individual groups like the pre-construction team and the different kind of probably regional buckets that you have, or industry buckets that you have, and selling each of those people? Are you trying to kind of shoot up the executive ladder and maybe just go talk to like the VP or higher ups to get an executive proposal together? What's your approach to get this sort of larger organization change implemented?
Well, first of all the scheduling piece of everything we do comes from our operations teams. Even in the pre-construction side of things, they reach out to set everything up. And it all comes down to either the director or vice president level, the project directors for the projects. They're the ones who are making the deals, making the commitments, and are the ones that need to be bought in above all else within the industry organization. So that's where we start. And it's making sure that in that group, we're all talking the same way. And I mean, we're in a pretty good place as far as how many of them are bought into the concept. Getting them to execute is where the rubber's starting to hit the road, and getting them to push that back down to the project teams. Again, like I said, a lot of times we'll go into that proposal side where a level 1, level 2 schedule, you really don't have enough detail to have a sharp pencil. So they need to make sure that they're reserving based on historical data what things happened in the big picture, that we're reserving the right amount of time to start with. And then when we get a sharpened pencil, make sure that we're starting the first conversation with, this is the way we're going to approach things. And this is for everybody's benefit, not just for ours.
Yeah. What's your sales pitch when you talk to your executive team initially? Call it a sales pitch, but your proposal, like, how did that conversation go for someone? I'm just thinking of someone who wants to do the same thing, needs to go talk to some executive leaders. How do you go have that conversation?
Well, first of all, you start finding your mentor, your advocate, the one who's going to help you beat the drum, because that helps you get in the door. Unfortunately, historically, schedulers are not necessarily always looked at as the highest value out of the gate. You just sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole. That's my biggest thing over the last 7 years here at Holder, is that we've gone from, you know what, we're going to have a scheduler because the contract says you got to have a scheduler, to, hey, you know what, our contract doesn't require us to have a scheduler, but we want somebody on the project. And that's what I think as an industry, as we develop a culture of schedulers across the industry, that's what it needs to be. So getting off my rabbit hole that you just sent me down. The first step is definitely find that advocate who can stand up there with you, who can help you get there. Somebody who's seen the success happen, and take them with you into the journey. The fact of the matter is, we do have several directors and vice presidents who have had a lot of success because we've gone into projects with the appropriate contingency and had those conversations. And we had a huge airport owner that we had a great conversation with. And the project manager for the airport was like, you mean in the last 60 years of my career, people have been sandbagging in my schedules? And me and the director looked him dead in the face and said, I guarantee you, and would stake my job on it, So we want to be transparent. That's not the right way. It's finding those people who have had those success stories and getting them to help you get your voice into that group is the step one. And then just making sure that you're very empirically and very cleanly saying, this is the benefit of it. This is how it can work and why it's important. And then relating it back to stuff that is relatable to them. Like I said, I like to point out, for years, we've always been putting contingency in our dollars. So why not in our time? There's a reason. Again, if he has an incredibly strong franchise, he's going to come bite us in the butt. So let's get ready for that.
So let's imagine that we've got everyone bought in, which I'm always amazed when I find a company in the industry that isn't bought into a bit of contingency, given that no project has ever gone exactly to plan. So it's a weird concept to me. But let's just say they're bought in. How do you stop? And I don't know what this is called, so I'm just going to name it. How do you stop what I'll call contingency corruption, which is, to your point, people going the other way. So contingency on contingency on contingency and hiding from people. So, this is our contingency. It's not that team's and that customer's. Like, how do you stop that kind of behavior happening?
Well, I think the first thing is you've got to develop a culture on your projects of collaboration. Where I've seen it not work with owners are those, sorry to throw out a market type that we don't do anymore, but I did with another client. But, the K-12 market, they're very much we're going to get the lowest possible number, the fastest possible time, beat the crap out of whoever it is we're contracting to do it, whether it's the general or the subs, and get the best value for our commodity. Whereas if you go into it with a attitude of, we're going to create the best culture so that we all win, we all succeed, we get the best product for the right price, not necessarily the cheapest price, for the right time, not necessarily the fastest time, and succeed together and keep doing business together, that enables you to have that conversation and to be able to go down that road. Like I said, unfortunately, I've been in the K-12 market in the past. My wife used to actually work for a school district, and she was in it, and I saw a lot of that kind of stuff. And that's not the only market that does it. It's just the one that I have experience in. And that's not a healthy way to be. I've watched subcontractors go out of business because that's what the owner did to the contractor, and then the contractor turned around and pushed it down to the sub, and they don't have the size or the ability to make up for it. So again, it's just getting everybody into that collaborative atmosphere up front. From the contractor side, our attitude is we always want to do the project that gets us asked back for the next project, not just gets them the lowest value. I'm a strong believer in we're providing an experience, not a commodity. There's a book out there called I think it's Performance-Based Economy, basically talking about how business is theater, and the moment you start thinking about providing a good experience for people, that's the experience economy, sorry. The moment you start providing a good experience for people, you're no longer a commodity, and they're letting you command the right price, not necessarily the cheapest price. You got to be reasonable, but they're letting you command that because they're paying for the experience, not just the end result. And I think that just adds that value to whatever you're doing.
I completely agree with what you're saying. By the very definition of projects, so a project is a unique endeavor. A unique endeavor, by definition, is not a commodity. But there are commodity type projects out there and commodity type clients. What you're essentially saying here is there are people we won't play with. Because if you're taking a collaborative shared contingency based approach, for example, you're going to have to refuse to deal with a client that just wants to beat you down and doesn't want to share. How do you explain that trade-off to the senior managers? Because you are saying there's a segment of the market we cannot approach with this methodology.
Well, I mean, I personally am saying that, yes. And coincidentally, those are sectors of the market that historically we haven't dealt with much.
Yep.
Part of it is making sure that we maintain our success in the markets that we are in so that we have that ability to go there. I will tell you, there are definitely some owners in some markets that we as a company already have that institutional position that we avoid them unless it's, and like, if a major data center client were to come to us and say, hey, we're going to build a school for this state, we would consider it. We'd go talk to them, but we're not going to go look after all the municipal contracts that are out there because that's not our business model. That's not what we do. And if we were to, we would find a way to make those the right situations, because inevitably there are those exceptions to those markets as well, where you can get in the door and bring them the experience that you give someone somewhere else as well, and they can get bought into it. And likewise, we have clients that we've done work for in the past that they've come back to us and asked us to come back, and we've said, no, it wasn't a good experience. Now, granted, right now in the economy, we have a lot of latitude to be able to do that. I mean, we're it's a great place to be in construction, especially data center construction right now, where there's more work than we have people for. So, and we're not going to go out there just to try to be the biggest that's out there. We're going to go out there and try and be the right contractor, the right business. That's our goal. That's where we go towards. So our senior management is the one who's leading that attitude. So it's really easy to filter down through the company.
So someone once said to me that contingency is fundamentally about the philosophy of, do I tell the truth?
Mm-hmm.
Really? Because, as you said, if we circle all the way back round to the first statement about the plan you put together is kind of an idealized plan, and then a contingency model is really, though, what do we in our competent experience actually think is going to happen? I'm trying to think of challenges here. We've already said that using this approach, you wouldn't go after those customers. Where do you think it's appropriate to maybe not have so much contingency, but to maintain a very collaborative approach?
Well, I mean, the way we have successfully done this on several projects, including a very recent one, a stadium project we did that was a high dollar project where we went, you know what, we're going to be 100% forthright. There's absolutely no contingency in this plan, but we know that there's not, and we know that stuff could happen. And that it may take throwing money at stuff to get over it, or stopping and taking ownership for the fact that we got to change something because we're seeing Murphy come up and bite us. So making sure that contractually we're set up in a way that we're all sharing that risk and it's not being pushed down to any one person or group.
Beautiful. So I guess you've actually rephrased it better than I did, which was, okay, you're setting up a culture and a capability of schedule contingency within a company. How do you trade off cost? What's that? Do you walk to the cost office and go, hey guys, do you know all that cost contingency you put in? Whack it up. How does that dynamic work?
So, I mean, I think one thing that happens is the more we get into developing that atmosphere and having owners who are buying off on the fact that contingency exists, the less we tend to carry in cost, because I think historically, 8 years ago, the concept of putting contingency in a schedule was not really discussed, or at least not above board. And so what would happen is no matter what, we always deliver on time period. So, we don't turn in projects late. So we had to carry money to make sure that if something happened, we could buy our way out of it, which gets really expensive the closer you get to the end. We were able to get a little bit tighter on our contingencies that we carried because of it. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I hear in your question that we see and we do is we can afford to be tighter here because we're being more reasonable over here and take that attitude to the pre-construction people and to the cost people.
Now, I'll just explain because it's obviously different experiences. Like my experience is that generally, aside from liquidated damages, a schedule overrun typically carries about 20% of ongoing costs because it's the overheads cost.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a direct tie between cost contingency and schedule contingency. But there's also, as you said, some of these weird trade-offs. So, for example, one of my friends, he was running a project that was doing a lot of concreting, and schedule was more like the cost of delay was more costly than what he did, which was to throw quicklime in the cement, which sets the cement faster. So there's all these little bits of trade-offs, but it's sounding to me like that stadium project you were talking about, it's just about being incredibly transparent with them, because you're saying if we're not taking contingency, we're going to have a big chunk of cash to throw at problems here.
Or be prepared to then have the conversation about, maybe the date needs to move. One of the two. Or what's the definition of is? That's the other thing that we sometimes will get into is, yes, we're going to be done. We're going to have your first event, but we're still going to be there for a couple months because this happened and this caused a problem. And that contractual definition of substantial completion needs to change because we didn't have the contingency. We all agreed we didn't have the contingency. And, we all have ownership in it. So we all need to bend and get you what you need. But on the same note, not.
I'll throw in a final question then based on that, which is in the UK, where really my experience lies, a lot of the contracts you have to do schedule contingency because it's actually written into the contract itself under NEC. What is a little bit less written into the contracts is how often you have to evaluate contingency, because things change. So a lot of people will go finger in the air at the start, and then they'll, for example, do a Monte Carlo simulation when they've done their detailed planning, and then they'll never talk about it again. And it's like, wait a minute. So how would you approach that?
I think just like we do with cost contingency, you've got to make sure that you set up some hold points to stop and say, okay, where's my contingency at right now is appropriate for the end of the project? Are we at a point where we can afford to give back contingency, or even just say, you know what? We still have it there. So as far as liquidated damages are concerned, but let's look at our GCs and pull them back because we think we're going to get there. Or just tell the story of, hey, that contingency we're probably not going to use. Let's just make sure we're transparent about the fact that it's sitting there and probably will not get used. Or, Murphy's had a really, really industrious month on us and we need to adjust accordingly, or have that conversation about risk and say, well, we're not going to adjust, but we all need to take ownership in the fact that we are now tight and we need to be on our game and making sure that we are doing everything we can to hold that date, including potentially spending money or completely resequencing or whatever it takes to get the job done.
Actually, I'm going to ask a final one then, Micah, then you can fly in. Who's accountable for that? Who owns that? Because someone's going to have to drive that conversation. And the worst person I've ever heard is, well, it's the project manager. Because by definition, the project manager is responsible for everything. And if you're responsible for everything, you're responsible for almost nothing, in my view. So it'd be like, who is responsible for sitting down and going,
well, I mean, ultimately, you're not wrong. It really ultimately is, in our case, it's the project director or vice president who's over the project, ultimately. But as far as the rubber hitting the road, everybody has ownership in it. I mean, the project manager who's on site needs to be keeping an eye on it. Definitely, if you have a scheduler on the project, the scheduler's got to be constantly looking at, all right, we've had a slip and we've taken contingency. Is this a problem? We're 50% of the way through the project and we use 75% of our contingency. That's, we're the ones that are down in the weeds, so we've got to step up and make the comment and force the conversation. Everyone really does. It's everybody's responsibility. Ultimately, it really does come back to who's the ultimate manager on the project. But part of being a manager is figuring out how to delegate those detailed responsibilities and trust your people to be doing the right thing from step to step, and making sure that and making sure that they have the voice to be able to step up and say, all right, here's where we are. Or, hey, we got to ton of contingency left over, we probably should have a conversation about, being the good guys and giving it back, whatever it is.
Well, folks, we like to keep these short, sweet, and get you back to walking your dog or doing your dishes, whatever you're doing out in life. No, we really appreciate you coming on today. I love this conversation. I'm excited to come back to you later to see how your mission went on your contingency. I feel like it's going to be good, and it's going to have a lot more detail, a lot more stories, a lot more stuff people can learn from it. Before we jump, any final thoughts from you?
I'm just going to hit it back again. Maintaining one thing to scheduling and planning and project management in general is that we have to have one source of truth across the board. And the moment we stop doing that, we're being disingenuous and we're not helping the whole team. And the only way we can succeed is as a team, not as individuals. And then the other thing is, just to throw out my catchphrase that I like to use quite a bit, is that we need to develop a culture of schedulers within the industry, not just the people who call themselves schedulers, but everybody needs to have that mindset of a scheduler, because in order to be a good builder, you got to be a good planner and scheduler. In order to be a good planner and scheduler, you got to be a good builder. But to me, that's what I beat my drum. I mean, my team carries around a challenge coin that says just that. We're empowering culture schedulers, and that's what we are all about. So those are probably my two closing points I threw out there.
Absolutely amazing. Well, folks, thanks for joining us today. Please, if you could, like, subscribe, share, help build that culture of scheduling that Noah had mentioned, and we'll see you on the next one.